No one saw him leave the village that morning, only the wide hush that followed in his steps. The wind was already mourning, like an old widow humming her grief across the white hills. His name was Elias Harrow, a quiet man of 40 winters, known for shoeing horses and saying little. But something stirred in his chest that morning, something heavier than the sky that threatened snow. It was 1841, in the far reaches of the Montana Territory, where settlements clung to the wilderness like candlelight to darkness. The frontier was brittle that year. Food was scarce, tempers thinner than the ice on Wolfjaw River. Elias had not spoken of the letter he held in his pocket, nor to whom it was addressed, but those who remembered him swore there was a different kind of silence in his eyes that week, less tired, more final. As he stepped beyond the last cabin, the wind rose like a curtain, and the first flakes fell, gentle and grave. No one knew why he had chosen to walk east, alone, with the snow already whispering death. But the snow was not his enemy. It was his witness. They say he paused once at the edge of the pines and looked back, not at the village but beyond it, as though seeing a time no one else could. The letter, sealed in wax, had no name on the front, only a symbol carved in shallow ink, 2 branches crossing a heart. Elias had written it the night before, lit by a single oil lamp. The pages were folded with care, pressed with warmth, sealed with trembling fingers. No one saw what he wrote, not even his brother, Daniel, who lived 2 doors down. But Elias had whispered before leaving, "It must reach her." Her? Who? The question would echo long after the storm, louder than thunder, colder than frost. Was it a sister in another state? A love from years past? A widow he wronged? A child he lost? No one knew. But the letter was his last devotion, and in that moment it became sacred. The blizzard took shape like a creature unfurling, its wings, wind howling with old teeth, snow thick enough to erase memory. Still Elias pressed on, step by step, as though the storm was merely a veil to be lifted, not survived. On the other side of the white horizon, in a quiet hamlet called Dry Bend, lived a woman who no longer lit candles for the dead. Her name was Lydia Vale. Her husband had vanished in the War of '36, and her son, Jonah, taken by fever 2 winters later. She had grown used to silence, the kind that sleeps beside you. Each morning, she sat by the window and stitched old linen into kerchiefs, selling them to travelers who no longer passed. She did not know Elias, not by face, not by name, but sometimes, when the wind curled just right through the frost-laced glass, she'd lift her eyes, slowly, instinctively, and look east. There was something in her that knew something was coming. Not joy, not fear, something else, like a memory she hadn't lived yet. On the night the storm fell hardest, she sat alone by the fire, her hands still. A knock never came, but she rose, just the same, and opened the door to nothing but snow. Her heart, unexplainably, skipped. A letter was on its way. She didn't know that yet, but sometimes the soul hears footsteps long before the world does. 3 days into the storm, a ranch hand named Caleb found a trail half swallowed by snow. His horse refused to go farther near Old Pine Ridge. Ears pinned back, hooves nervous. Caleb dismounted, sensing something that smelled not of death, but of memory. In the corner of an abandoned barn, he found the man. Elias lay curled beneath a collapsed beam, his coat ripped, his fingers blue but clenched. In them, the letter, untouched by the frost. Caleb did not know the man, but something about the stillness of his face, calm, as though he'd seen what he came to see, haunted him. Caleb built a fire and sat beside the body for hours, unsure why. Perhaps to give witness, perhaps to warm the letter, or perhaps because something ancient inside him whispered, "This matters." He rode out the next morning, the letter wrapped inside his own coat. No map, no address, only the symbol. and the feeling that he was carrying more than paper. In a small trading post 2 valleys east, Caleb came across a mute boy sweeping snow from the steps. The boy was no older than 10, with eyes older than ruin. Caleb asked him if he recognized the seal. The boy said nothing, but reached out, touched it once, then pointed west toward Dry Bend. Something in Caleb's breath stopped. It wasn't just the boy's certainty. It was the weight of it, as if the letter wanted to go there. He gave the boy a coin and left before nightfall. But behind him, the boy knelt where Caleb had stood, closed his eyes, and pressed a palm to the earth, whispering nothing, listening to something only he could hear. Dry Bend was buried in white by the time Caleb arrived. The streets were ghost-traced, doors shuttered. He asked at the chapel, then the inn, then the mill. No one knew of the symbol until he showed it to the oldest woman in the town, Marilyn Tove, who hadn't spoken to a soul in 3 years. She saw the seal and wept. It was her mark, she said, trembling, before the world took her joy. Whose? Caleb asked. Marilyn pointed to the hill. There, she whispered. Lydia Vale. Caleb rode slowly, not from fear, but reverence. The letter had waited. Now it was time. The snow was falling softer now, not as a threat, but as memory, descending, gently over roofs and railings, like the breath of forgotten angels. Caleb tied his horse at the edge of the gate and approached the cottage on foot. There was no smoke from the chimney, but the door was not locked, as if it too had been waiting. Inside, Lydia Vale sat at a small table, turning a teacup between her hands. She did not flinch when the door opened. She did not stand. She only lifted her eyes, calm, as though she'd expected this moment all her life. Caleb stepped forward, awkward beneath the weight of the letter. The air between them seemed older than either of their names. He held it out, the seal now dry but unbroken, a symbol pressed into the wax like an unspoken vow. I don't know you, she said, her voice barely more than air. But that letter, it's mine. He nodded without knowing why. Lydia took it gently, as if it might vanish at a touch. She did not open it. Not yet. She held it in her lap and looked out the window instead, where the snow was painting the world in silence. Years ago, she said slowly, I loved a man named Elias Harrow. Before the war, before the silence, Caleb breathed in deeply. The fire crackled once behind him, though he hadn't lit it. I never knew if he lived, if he forgave me. I only knew that I stayed, and he didn't. She looked down at the seal. Her fingers traced it, trembling. And then, without ceremony, she opened the letter. It was not long, just a page, but when she finished reading it, she wept. Not loudly, not broken, but like the earth weeps under thaw. Slow, steady, ancient. He forgave me, she whispered. And for the first time in 20 years, the weight in her chest lifted. She wasn't alone anymore. Somewhere, across wind and time, someone had remembered her name. The snow thawed slowly that night, as if time itself were cautious not to disturb what had passed. Lydia sat by the fire, the letter pressed to her chest. Caleb did not speak. He simply remained, a presence to bear witness to the unburdening of a life. She told him finally what no one else knew. I was meant to leave with Elias, she said, but I stayed behind. My mother had fallen ill, and my father begged me to remain. Elias thought I had chosen comfort over him, but I hadn't. I wrote to him, again and again. No reply. She smiled faintly. And now I know why. He never received them. The post burned that year, raided and set alight by men running from the law. My letters lost. Caleb listened, the wind tapping the window like an old friend returning. This letter he sent me now, she continued, voice softer than breath, was never for today. He must have written it years ago. Maybe he meant to send it then. Maybe he carried it all this time. She folded the paper with reverence, placing it back in its envelope. The seal broken, the truth revealed. It found its way anyway. The thought hung there, fragile and eternal, as if some things are too true to ever stay buried. The storm outside weakened to a hush. The world seemed to lean in, listening. Caleb rose to leave, but Lydia stopped him. "You've carried something sacred," she said, "and now you are part of its story." He nodded once, not as agreement, but as understanding, and when he stepped back into the snow, something inside him shifted, as if he were no longer just a man, but a thread in something larger, a quiet myth, unfolding. Back in the wilderness where Elias had fallen, the wind moved through the trees like it was searching. Caleb returned days later, alone, carrying with him a spade and a bundle of cloth. He found the barn again, or what remained of it, bare ribs of timber reaching into the gray sky. Elias was still there. The cold had preserved him, his face serene, as if he had simply paused to dream. Caleb knelt, removed his hat, and whispered a prayer, not one from the Bible, but one born from the heart. He dug not far from the barn beneath a birch tree, slow, deliberate, sacred. When the earth opened, he wrapped Elias carefully, as though clothing a child for rest. No gravestone marked the place, only a branch planted upright at the head, and beside it, Caleb carved into bark. He walked through the storm to deliver his truth, and now the storm has laid him to sleep. He stood for a long time after, snow melting against his skin, eyes hollow with something deeper than grief. Respect. Kinship. Caleb did not speak of the burial when he returned to the settlement. Some things are not for towns to hold. They are for the land, for silence, for the old winds. And so Elias Harrow became a name not often spoken, but always felt. A ghost not feared but honored. A man who died with a letter in his hand. Because some words were never meant to remain unsent. Snow thawed into mud by the end of March. The rivers rose with memories, buried beneath the ice, and winter became a hush rather than a wait. In Dry Bend, Lydia Vale moved through her cottage like someone relearning how to breathe. She still woke before dawn, still boiled the water twice, still mended linen with the same patience she had worn for years. But there was something different now. She lit a candle each night by the letter, not out of mourning, but out of recognition. It sat beneath a cracked glass dome on the mantel, Elias's final words folded precisely, the seal tucked beneath it like an offering. She did not show it to others. She did not speak of it to the curious, who came knocking after hearing Caleb's whisperings. This was not a tale for hungry ears or idle mouths. This was a story that lived in the quiet. And in that quiet, Lydia began writing again. Only short pages at first, scraps of memory, ink bleeding softly into old paper. But soon they grew longer. Letters not to anyone living, but to Elias. Letters full of things she had never said aloud. How his voice echoed in her dreams. How she waited too long to forgive herself. How she sometimes heard his name in the sound of wood creaking on winter nights. She folded each one carefully, sealed them with wax, and placed them in a wooden box. Not to send, to keep, because sometimes the soul needs to speak, even if no one answers. The trail where Elias had walked became something of a legend among travelers. Ranchers whispered of a man who died delivering a message, and how that message had melted its way into a woman's heart. Some came looking, journalists with too clean boots, clergymen with heavy crosses, soldiers on leave with too much drink in them. But none found the barn, none found the grave. Caleb had erased the tracks long ago, and the wilderness kept its secrets well. A deer path may wind close, a hawk may cry above, but the place remained hidden, not by force, but by will. Still, for those who passed near it, something strange often occurred. A sudden silence would fall, as if the trees were listening, or a wind would rise, brushing their cheeks with fingers made of memory. Some felt an ache behind the ribs. Others paused, heart uncertain before pressing onward. And every spring, a single birch leaf was found drifting far from its tree, downriver, untouched by decay. Some said it was coincidence. Others said it was him, Elias Harrow, walking still. Years passed. The war came again. Men grew older. The frontier softened. And Lydia Vale's hands became wrinkled maps of time. Yet each evening she still lit a single candle and sat before the hearth. The letter nearby, the box of unsent replies nestled beside her feet. She never remarried. She never left Dry Bend. But she lived. She taught the children how to stitch and bake and plant by the moon. She told stories, never hers, but always laced with longing. People loved her without knowing why. Some said her eyes held something sacred, like someone who had been chosen to hold another's burden, and had done so with grace. And one night, when her breath grew shallow and her hands too weak to write, she asked the youngest of her neighbors, daughters, to help her with one final request. "Burn the letters," she said softly. "All of them. But not with sorrow, with thanks." The girl, confused, obeyed. She carried the wooden box into the firelight, and Lydia watched as the flames took each page. Slowly, smoke curling upward like the hands of old friends reaching for one last dance, and as the last paper turned to ash, Lydia closed her eyes, not with fear, but peace. Because sometimes the journey of a letter isn't to arrive. It's to be carried, to be remembered, to become part of someone else's fire. And so, in a village forgotten by time, a letter once frozen in a dead man's hand became something more. Not just a message, but a bridge between two hearts, across winter, through silence, and into legend.